Okay, and in the final installment of this week's lecture, let's have a quick talk about RegTech. So let's start with what RegTech is. Ultimately, RegTech is about the management of regulatory processes, mostly in the financial services or finance industries. So banks, financial planners, insurance companies, those kind of things. The main functions of RegTech, so what is the tool for, is ultimately around addressing the requirements that those financial institutions have to interface with their regulatory requirements. So a lot of it is around reporting, monitoring and compliance with regulation. The RegTech industry is made up with companies, most of them cloud computing companies, that help businesses comply with their regulations efficiently and ultimately less expensively. So a big driver of the industry is around increasing efficiencies, not inefficiencies, increasing efficiencies and driving down costs. So let's say we can define RegTech as essentially using technology, regulated entities that use technology to assist them in achieving compliance with their regulatory obligations and reduce the costs of that compliance. The need for RegTech has become clearer and clearer as we're seeing on one side more and more laws that are coming in requiring reporting and the monitoring of different kinds of transactions, and also more and more technology is being used in those transactions. When's the last time that you held any cash in your hand? Okay, for some of you it might have been minutes ago, but most of us, other than when we're perhaps buying a coffee or small amounts, money is not something that we physically touch or feel anymore. We get paid into our bank account. We transfer money from our bank account to pay our rent. We're not actually touching money anymore. It's all being done by computers, by ledgers. And we'll talk about this when we get to blockchain in particular, I guess. But when you think about the amount of money that moves around cities, countries, and internationally all the time, and you think about the various institutions and systems that need to talk to each other in order to do that, then you can see how you've got many different sets of regulatory requirements and interfaces, many risks, many opportunities for things to go wrong. So, in fact, I probably should have been saying that while I had this slide up here. I think that probably the three main sets of challenges that RegTech is trying to address fall within the AML and CTF regimes. So these are well-known acronyms that stand for anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing. Now, we're anti-money laundering, but we're also anti-counter-terrorism funding, by the way, just so you understand. There are swathes of laws that require institutions that deal with money, the physical stuff as well as electronic transfers of money, the ledger stuff, to be able to monitor and report on what happens with transactions with a view to ensuring that money laundering doesn't happen and that and terrorism is not financed effectively. Cybercrime generally, online crime, is happening all the time, every day. Huge swathes of it are not being reported. Again, regulatory requirements, regulation requires financial institutions to monitor and report with a view to reducing cybercrime. One of the things that's come up more recently, or maybe it's just come to the surface more recently, is also sanctions laws you might not even be aware of. When Russia invaded Ukraine, for example, changes were made to the sanctions laws in a number of countries that prevented those institutions within those countries from transacting with Russian oligarchs. And again, compliance with sanctions regimes requires monitoring, requires reporting, requires understanding who is doing what and how they are related to each other. The aftermath of the global financial crisis saw significant increased regulation in relation to financial services. The lax approach to the issue of mortgages and then the bundling of those mortgages and reselling them as investment products is well understood to be the basis for the 2008 global financial crisis. Subsequently in Australia too, we've seen a significant Royal Commission into the financial services industry, and the superannuation industry. That in turn led to significant changes to the ways that financial planning, insurance and banking is regulated in Australia. And none of those changes saw a softening or a lessening of the regulation that was involved. Now, it's really interesting to me. Oh, sorry, I thought I changed my slide and I hadn't. Sorry about that. Over that time, what we're seeing is significant increases in RegTech companies in Australia. The graph that I've got on the slide there, please take a look at it if you're just listening to this at some point. It actually comes from Australia's RegTech Association, and it shows that, and it's from a report where they argue that there is significant underfunding in the RegTech sector in Australia, but they're demonstrating that Australia is third in terms of the number of RegTechs that are based in this country, and which account for in the order of 13% of the global total of all RegTechs that are currently providing services in this country. I thought this graphic from that same report was really interesting too, because it demonstrates the kind of key clusters of activity that the RegTechs are working in. So I'm looking down rather than looking at you to look at the slide. But you can see actually the top. So the top one is verification, the activity of identifying who people are, and that they are who they say they are. So VOI, or verification of identity, is something that hits the lives of lawyers as well. We are, particularly when we're advising on financial products, so on the legal way that mortgages work, for example, or on the provision of guarantees or other kind of security instruments, it's a very important part of the process that the individuals receive independent advice and that we verify that we are in fact advising the right person. A friend of mine many years ago coined the phrase STD, sexually transmitted debt, often referring to debt that mothers and lovers are saddled with when sons, brothers and partners basically borrow money in their name or use their assets as security. If you haven't yet, you will come across the famous CBA and Amadio case, which is really sort of kicked that off, and that question around, well, what is the responsibility of a bank to advise somebody when it takes security of the issues associated with the financial ramifications of the document that they are signing, particularly if they suffer from some kind of impairment. In Amadio, the lady didn't actually speak English, and so she wasn't understanding what the document meant and was reliant entirely on what she was told about them. So verification, who you are, monitoring of what those transactions are, and the implementation and governance are the top three. So GRC, governance solutions essentially, and other process optimization. So compliance regimes often require ensuring that you know who's doing what, who's checking what, whether risks have been reported, a range of things like that. And it's Interestingly enough, pretty much straight out of uni, people with law degrees who end up working as compliance officers are probably earning more money than your standard straight out of law school lawyer. The growth or the need, the growth for compliance officers, and the complexity and quite frankly, that like how interesting that work has become has changed significantly over the years. We also see kind of data compliance management, risk analysis, and regulatory analysis at the bottom of that list at the moment. The risk analysis piece, I feel like that might be slightly underrepresented at this time because risk analysis is also addressed in a range of other ways, perhaps through the KYC or know your customer procedures, perhaps through general audit procedures, etc. So that's all I have for this week to talk about. I just really wanted to highlight what RegTech was, what RegTech is. The material that you have in the reading will help you focus in on some of the ethical issues and what it means for the future of law in each case. Now, there's a lot of reading this week. I'm hoping that this lecture gives you a reasonably good guide as to what it is that you should look for in the reading. Ultimately, we're talking about tools at the moment, so it's incumbent on you to stand back, continue to stand back and think, okay, what is it that I am trying to do with these tools? How, why, and when will I need this tool? And will this tool continue to be the right one? Will it continue to be fit for purpose? Or as the industry that I am working in is changing, will the nature of the legal work that I do change? And as a consequence, the nature of the tools that I need? Or are we seeing more bedding down? I can't answer these questions, but they're definitely interesting things to think about. Enjoy your week, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Cheers.